It was a clear, cold morning on April 26, 1982, when James May stepped out into the world. He was 21 years old, full of self-confidence and determination. His heart was full of arrogance, and his mind overflowed with overconfidence. James had always believed that he could handle anything. Whether it was physical challenges or mental obstacles, he was convinced he could control nature. The Huccacove Cave, located near the famous Cave of the Winds in Colorado, seemed like no different challenge to him. He always felt that he could control any situation. This sense of invincibility drove him, but it would also almost bring him down. This is the horrific story of the Huccacove Cave. His friends knew James well. They knew how quickly his pride could be hurt and how easily his ego could be bruised. They also knew he had no problem taking risks. When they set off for the cave that Saturday morning, James walked ahead with his usual bravado. His head held high, full of confidence. He was sure he could handle anything the cave threw at him. James wore a simple shirt and jeans with knee pads strapped to his legs. He had packed his flashlights, but he brought nothing else. No food, no water. This didn't concern James, though, because he was sure the cave wouldn't beat him. Even without extra water or food, he would make it out just fine. His friends, now somewhat tired of James' arrogance, followed him in silence as they ventured deeper into the cave. Soon it was clear that the tension between James and his friends was growing. Perhaps it was the claustrophobia of the narrow tunnels, or the cold air that frayed their nerves, or simply James's ever-present arrogance. What was said exactly is lost to time, but the atmosphere grew increasingly hostile. Eventually, James turned to his friends, angry, and shouted, "Leave me! I'll find my own way out." His face twisted in fury and pride. He declared that he didn't need them, and that he would show them that he could do it alone. His friends had had enough. They knew James often had outbursts like this, but this time they were done. They decided to let him have his way. Maybe they thought he would realize the difficulty once he ventured further into the cave. Maybe they thought the cold and darkness would humble him. Either way, they left him behind and continued on their way without him. James, now completely alone in the vast cave, still felt in control of his fate. He thought he had everything under control, but soon he would realize that the cave was much more dangerous than he had anticipated. At first, James enjoyed his solitude. His ego made him believe that he could navigate the cave's complicated tunnels on his own. He turned on one of his flashlights and began to walk deeper into the cave, determined to explore. He was sure he didn't need help, but it didn't take long for reality to catch up with him. The tunnels became narrower, the shadows grew longer, and the sound of his footsteps echoed louder in the silence. James began to feel uneasy, but his pride kept his fear in check. After all, he had everything he needed, his flashlight and his determination. But soon, the path became less clear. The tunnels twisted and turned, and even his sense of direction seemed to fail him. Time seemed to stand still, and James began to feel lost. Hours passed, his friends were long gone, and the exit that he thought he knew now seemed unreachable. He tried one passage, but it led deeper into the cave instead of out. He turned around and tried another, but it also ended in a dead end. His confidence began to fade. The cave was much larger than he had imagined, and now he was completely, hopelessly lost. The light from his flashlight seemed dimmer now. James sat down on a damp rock, his knees pulled up to his chest, panic gnawing at the edges of his mind. But in the cave, time had no meaning. The cold started to sink into his skin. He could feel exhaustion taking over his body. Desperation led him to try to make a fire, but it was a weak, sputtering flame. He burned everything he had left: his shirt, his knee pads, even the batteries from his flashlights, anything to stave off the cold. But eventually, he was left with nothing but his pants and sneakers. It was the irrationality of his mind slipping. Meanwhile, his friends remained unaware of the danger James was in. They didn't realize the severity of the situation until the next day. When James didn't return on Sunday, they went back into the cave. They saw his flashlight in the distance, but when they approached, they were startled when he turned it off and refused to answer their calls. They thought he was fine on his own. It wasn't until his mother became concerned about his disappearance and contacted the El Paso Sheriff's Department that real action was taken. By Sunday night, a search party was formed, but after 5 hours of combing through the cave, there was still no sign of James. On Monday, around noon, hope arrived in the form of Barney Foster. Foster, someone who knew Huccacove Cave better than most, while the rescue team had been prepared to let the search die down, knowing James had a habit of disappearing for days at a time, Foster wasn't willing to let the young man die in the depths of the cave. He pushed through the narrowest passages, places few had dared to go. It was the first sign that James was still in the cave. Foster pressed on deeper into the cave's upper section, and then, in a room filled with large, breakdown blocks, he heard it, a cough. James May lay there on the cold stone floor, battered and broken. Foster gave him an energy bar and water, and slowly, carefully, they made their way out. James had survived 54 hours lost in the cave, but just barely. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, suffering from severe dehydration, hypothermia, and exhaustion. He was admitted immediately and treated for his injuries, spending weeks under care. During his long recovery, James had time to reflect on the ordeal that almost cost him his life. The cave had stripped him of his arrogance, humbling him in a way nothing else could. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more gripping tales from the underwater world. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do in a situation like this? Until next time, stay safe, explore wisely, and always respect the depths.